Far in the future, deep in the 22nd century, the Earth was a post-apocalyptic wasteland. A lone survivor prepped for another mission, while off in the distance, a terrified man ran screaming for help. Deadly monsters quickly cornered him. He begged for his life, just like every other hopeless human in this brutal world. Everyone shared the same burning rage. Whoever ruined the Earth needed to pay. Just then, a white-haired warrior leaped from a speeding fighter jet, crushing one of the beasts upon landing. He apologized for the delay, and the rescued man thanked him repeatedly. He believed humanity could finally reclaim the planet. Jin reassured him, saying he could finally rest easy now. But the boy was too badly hurt, and he passed away right there. Just then, another soldier walked up, muttering that they were too late. That kid was probably the very last human alive. He urged Jin to face reality and accept that humanity was officially extinct. These mutated beasts had spawned from centuries of toxic runaway pollution. They were highly mutated creatures with insane healing abilities that could survive even a direct nuclear blast. Still, humanity refused to surrender, launching endless experiments until they finally discovered a way to fight back. But Kagura pointed out that with everyone dead, there was simply no one left to save. Even so, Jin insisted that hope remained. When Kagura questioned if there were any survivors left, Jin answered that while there were none today, there would be tomorrow. He thought of the nanomachines he built, wondering if they could also heal the broken environment. Kagura confirmed they could. They did not just stop the monsters from healing, they also slowly started purifying the planet. Jin believed that one day, the Earth would recover its beauty, allowing a brand new civilization to rise from the ashes. Kagura dismissed it as a pipe dream, but Jin replied that even a tiny sliver of hope was enough. Later, as Jin recovered, both men realized their unique powers might still be needed in the future. To keep that dream alive, Jin entered a cryogenic sleep pod, letting the endless years roll by. The beast died off, nature bloomed, wildlife returned, and after 100 million years, his pod finally began to thaw. On this newly reborn planet, a pack of beast folk fled from a massive monster trying to hunt them down. They desperately wondered if this place was actually safe to hide in. But their young female leader insisted it was, believing their guardian deity rested inside. But when they opened the ancient temple doors, they found a dead end. The beast struggled to squeeze through the entrance, but it forced its way inside and cornered them. Suddenly, a chamber at the back of the temple burst open, and a lightning-fast figure blew the monster's head off. It was Jin, proving that having faith in the future had actually paid off. Kagura's storage vault worked like a charm. All his gear, weapons, and clothes were intact after 100 million years. Most of the computer files were completely corrupted. But it was amazing the bunker survived at all, likely protected by those atmospheric nanomachines. Now, he needed to find out what became of the world. His only source of answers was a data cube left behind by Kagura. Turning to the terrified group, he asked who they were, only to realize he was standing there completely naked. He quickly apologized, joking that sleeping naked for 100 million years made him forget before slipping back into his gear. Stepping out of the bunker temple, the brilliant sunshine blinded him after 100 million years in the dark, but he was awestruck by the stunning new world. One of the beast girls gestured for him to follow. Spotting their animal ears, Jin quickly realized these creatures were not human. Humanity had died out, and a new species had evolved in their place, eerily human-like, likely guided by those ancient nanomachines. Fortunately, the fact that they shared a common language was a very good sign. He introduced himself as Shidojin, telling them to just call him Jin. The girl said her name was Hakama, the large koala-like beastman was Danpu, and the shy cat-eared boy was Shandy. Jin then asked where they were leading him, and what exactly they needed him to do. Hakama replied that they were close, explaining they needed his help to destroy the corruptors. Jin was shocked those things still existed, but when they arrived at the village, everything was already burning. Shandy bolted toward the flames to find his family, while Jin stood back, scanning the area carefully. Crude wooden fences and basic stone huts made up the settlement. It was clear to Jin that he had woken up at the dawn of a brand new civilization. Right in the middle of the chaos, desperate villagers fought back against a massive beast. An old woman demanded to know why Hakama returned, while Jin quietly analyzed the monster, realizing it was a modern type of corrupted. This thing looked incredibly similar to the beasts he used to fight. Hakama told her grandmother she refused to run, focusing her inner energy to prepare for a fight. Seeing this, Jin was impressed. Deciding to test a theory, he dashed ahead and delivered a brutal kick to the monster's skull, saving the elder and letting Hakama strike the final blow. Focusing her energy, she launched a blazing fireball that defeated the creature. Jin smiled. As expected, his nanomachines were successfully stopping the monster from healing its wounds. This corrupted couldn't regenerate anymore, even after taking a pretty basic hit. The airborne nanomachines had clearly weakened these beasts. Still, he knew only rare, compatible humans could actually harness and control them. He asked the elder if everyone in this era possessed that ability. She shook her head, explaining that only a select few could. Only those with what they call divine power. In the entire village, only 4 people had it, including Hakama. When Hakama asked where the other 3 were, her grandmother replied they had already fled to safety. But the real nightmare was just beginning. Their home was already ruined, and the beast they just killed was merely a newly hatched newborn. The parent monster was vastly more dangerous, and a swarm of hungry larvae would soon overrun the village. Other warriors arrived to back them up, one bragging that he would slay the beast alone. The elder urgently asked about the villagers, and the warrior promised they had all been escorted to safety. Standing nearby was Hakama's father, who anxiously asked where she had been. She admitted she went to the sealed door. The grandmother gasped, reminding her that place was strictly forbidden. But Hakama replied that she always said the guardian deity slept behind that door, ready to save them in times of peril. The elder stared at Jin, wondering if this strange man was really their god, since he looked completely ordinary. The spearman laughed, mocking the idea that such an inferior species could ever be a guardian god. Jin frowned at the insult, while Shandi quickly warned her arrogant brother to watch his mouth. She insisted Jin had easily slain a monster, but the spearman, Sarlos, laughed it off as a weak, tiny larva. He barked that this was their village's problem, warning the outsider that he wasn't welcome and should keep his nose out of it. Hakama's father asked where Salus was heading, and he arrogantly replied he was going to slay the giant beast because that was his duty. The elder called him foolish, pleading that they needed to run instead. She turned to Jin and offered her deepest thanks. Though she had no idea who he was, she asked for one favor. She begged him to lead the children and her son to the shelter, while she went to aid Salus, even if it cost her life. But Jin flatly refused. He had way too much pride to let someone call him inferior and then turn tail and run. Fearless, Salus charged the monster head-on, boasting that he would protect his homeland and become a legendary holy knight. He swore that no invading beast would ever survive on his watch. As soon as the spearman struck, the beast summoned a swarm of larvae, but Salus easily sliced through them all. He landed a heavy blow right on the monster's face, making it shriek. But the wound healed completely in mere seconds. The beast retaliated, swinging a massive claw that would have crushed the warrior. But Jin suddenly blocked the strike with his shield, asking if he was okay. Suddenly, more larvae ambushed the distracted fighter, but with a simple snap of Jin's fingers, 2 sharp energy beams pierced right through the smaller monsters, instantly killing them. The watching villagers gasped, absolutely stunned by his incredible power. Using just one hand, Jin easily blocked a heavy blow from the giant beast, though he muttered that it felt a bit heavy. He ordered everyone to retreat immediately, pulling Salus out of harm's way. He explained that basic attacks were useless since the monster could instantly heal itself. To stop that, they needed nanomachines to block its healing factor, the very thing they called divine power. He admitted Salus had a decent spear strike, but it wasn't deep enough to stop the healing process. Stunned, Salus asked if he truly was their guardian deity, but Jin joked that he didn't recall ever becoming a god. However, there was one thing he wanted to clear up. Pointing at the beast, Jin asked if it was the village's problem. When Salus stubbornly agreed, claiming he would handle it, Jin smiled and corrected him, "No. Now, it's my problem." The monster lashed out with massive tentacles, but Jin effortlessly dodged each strike while planning a way to completely pin it down. Deploying his nanomachines, he instantly crystallized the giant tentacles in midair, freezing them solid like ice. Jin declared these monsters were born from his generation's sins. Since he had survived for 100 million years, it was his duty to end this nightmare once and for all. Salus asked how he planned to. Jin explained he was the product of endless human tragedy and a history soaked in blood, the result of countless brutal, repeating cycles. He was the last human ever made. Then, he fired a plasma beam laced with nanomachines, completely vaporizing the monster's body in a single blinding flash. While the crowd cowered in absolute terror, Hakama watched in awe as the beam pierced the sky, cutting through clouds and lighting up the day. Jin then declared that, along with being the final human, he was humanity's ultimate weapon. Meanwhile, a silent observer watched everything unfold from afar. They had set out to investigate the new corrupted near Kodama village, but stumbled upon something far more incredible. Believing not even the Holy Knight's captain could match this power, they rushed back to the royal captain to report the incident. That night, Jin analyzed the message cube Kagura had left behind. The recording began by stating that if Jin was hearing this, it meant Kagura was no longer in this world. He joked about always wanting to say that line, then wondered what the future actually looked like, imagining that the environment must have healed. But he quickly cut to the chase and warned about a major problem. Despite the planet's recovery, the corrupted monsters would likely never vanish. Kagura explained that about 1,000 years into cryopreservation, he noticed something was wrong with the water. He repeatedly woke from his deep slumber to monitor the changing world. While the reviving nature caused corrupted numbers to drop, he discovered an even worse threat. The monsters were evolving alongside the environment. He didn't know how it was happening, but he knew they would become far more dangerous. All he could do was teach new life forms how to fight back, while leaving behind a stash of energy for Jin. Checking his pockets, Jin found a syringe of nanomachines. Once injected, his body began to modify itself. Kagura explained that this power was exclusive to Jin, as he possessed 100% compatibility with nanomachines. After all, he was literally made from them. This ability allowed Jin to summon a blade straight from his palm, manipulating nanomachines to construct physical objects. It was a remarkably useful power. Kagura had also scattered gear and upgrades across secret research labs worldwide, hiding them separately to ensure they weren't all destroyed at the same time. He urged Jin to explore this new frontier, even without knowing how deadly the corrupted would eventually become. He was absolutely certain this new world was better than the ruined past. The hologram then revealed Kagura's true face, now showing a heavily aged man. He admitted he couldn't stand by Jin's side anymore, leaving the world's fate in his hands. Jin quietly agreed. Right then, Hakama called out to him, and Danpu laughed that the village couldn't start the celebration without the star of the show. Suddenly, Jin realized Hakama's necklace was actually an access key to an ancient laboratory. When he asked about the pendant, she explained that an influential figure had entrusted it to her clan generations ago. Passed down through generations, the heirloom was said to ensure that the guardian deity would always protect whoever held it. Jin finally understood how she had unlocked the laboratory door, realizing he owed a massive debt to the villagers. Later, the villagers gather around a roaring bonfire, feasting and drinking to celebrate their victory. When Jin, their supposed guardian deity, showed up, some began whispering that it was a joke because he looked like a weak, inferior species. One man scoffed, asking if that skinny kid had really defeated the beast. That's when Sala stepped in, scolding them. She snapped that since they ran away from the fight, they'd never know what happened, calling them a bunch of fools. He firmly declared that Jin was indeed their guardian deity, and he was absolutely incredible. The kids found it hilarious how quickly he had changed his attitude. The elder thanked him once more on behalf of the village, and Hakama's father added that without him, they would have been wiped off the map, leaving them deeply in his debt. Jin replied that he didn't need a reward, but if they insisted, he only wanted information. He needed to learn everything about this new world. The elder explained that the best place to start was the royal capital of Kermosia, home of the ruling king. Since people from every corner gathered there, it was the best place to find news about the world. The Kodama villagers often traveled to the capital to sell their unique silk goods. It was a long, dangerous trek, but she trusted their guardian deity would handle it. Jin admitted he had no clue where the capital was. The elder suggested Hakama guide him, since she had her own business to settle there anyway. She explained that Hakama held divine power, and the royal capital had a special academy built to train those kinds of abilities. The recent invasion had delayed her plans, but they still really wanted her to enroll. This way, they could travel together. Jin found it fascinating that schools and training academies actually existed in this era. Right then, Sala showed up, claiming he was the perfect guide for their guardian deity. But the elder snapped that he had zero business in the capital. He argued that he planned to join the Order of the Holy Knights, but she reminded him that anyone who skipped the academy could never become a knight. As he whined in protest, Jin remarked that since divine power was so rare, maybe the kid actually had some real potential. Hakama pointed out there was a written exam, and Sala had completely failed it. Jin found that fair, but the title of Holy Knight left him curious. Meanwhile, the girl who had been spying on them rushed back to tell a knight that the Kodama village monster was dead. She explained that she was heading straight to the guild master to report the whole incident. The knight found this highly suspicious, believing only a holy knight could slay such a beast, so he decided to investigate the matter himself. Hearing the beast was already dead surprised him. The messenger joked about weird coincidences, completely oblivious to one of the monster offspring lurking right behind her. The knight instantly sliced the creature in half with a single sword strike, muttering that if the rumors were true, things were about to get interesting. He was highly curious to uncover who had actually defeated the massive beast. Later, Jin woke up in the cozy cabin where he had slept and stepped out to admire the peaceful view. The air was crisp and refreshing. He never imagined he would see such a gorgeous world again, wishing deeply that Kagura could have witnessed it alongside him. Shandi suddenly appeared, politely suggesting that, as their guardian deity, he should probably put some clothes on before wandering outdoors. Soon, Jin was ready to set off. The elder firmly reminded Hakama to fulfill her duties as his guide properly. Sala pouted, grumbling that he could learn so much from shadowing the guardian deity, but the elder insisted that he focus on his studies first. Jin encouraged Sala, telling him his combat moves were actually decent, and promised to wait for him in the capital. The young man excitedly promised that he would work his hardest. Hakama's father begged them to look out for her and stay safe during their long travels. As they traveled, Jin marveled at the changing scenery. The long trek treated them to stunning sunsets and ever-shifting natural landscapes. Sitting by the campfire that night, he asked how long their journey would take. Hakama estimated they had about 4 days of walking ahead. She then asked why he was so eager to learn details about their world. Jin smiled and called it a secret. He knew the corrupted still existed, but theoretically, they should only survive in heavily polluted areas. Yet, the lake where they battled that beast was pristine, completely contradicting his theories. Hakama asked why he looked so troubled, pointing out that his expression seemed almost scary. Jin brushed it off as random thoughts, but privately felt relieved that the corrupted had not fully taken over the world yet. First, Jin had to figure out how people nowadays combated the corrupted. Deciding to gather clues step by step, as he and Hakama ate dinner by the fire, that very same night stepped out, apologizing for interrupting their rest but asking to speak. When Jin questioned his identity, the man introduced himself as Argus Walton, captain of the 7th Division of the Holy Knights. As Jin repeated the name of their order, with genuine curiosity, the female knight beside Argus snapped, demanding that he at least stand up when addressing their captain. Argus raised a hand to quiet her, apologizing for his subordinate's attitude and reiterating that he just wanted a friendly chat. Jin asked if they already knew his identity and if they had actively been searching for him. Argus apologized again for his subordinate's behavior, but admitted they wanted to know where the duo came from and where they were headed. Hakama answered that they hailed from Kodama village and were traveling straight to the royal capital. The female knight, Karina, declared she knew it was them, pointing out that Kodama had absolutely no birth records for inferior species, implying Jin was in big trouble. Jin was surprised they even kept birth records, realizing this kingdom was surprisingly well organized for such an ancient era. Argus noted that the clothes Hakama wore were quite unique local specialties. Kodama village's rare fabric sold in the royal capital for huge sums, mostly custom made for children and barely ever seen on the open market. That proved they actually came from the village. Still, he pointed out that Jin's clothes looked completely unfamiliar. He added that the highway between Kodama and the capital was lately plagued by bandit attacks where criminals used kids to lure in travelers, just like the scene they stumbled upon. Hakama stood up for Jin, insisting he was harmless, but Argus made it clear he would decide that for himself. Before Hakama could summon her divine power to protect Jin, Argus's overwhelming spiritual pressure locked her down before she could even move. He noted that she was a highly gifted girl with massive potential power. Right then, Jin realized these holy knights were the real deal. Argus demanded to know where the foreigner was from, warning he could arrest him on the spot. Jin stared back for a moment, sighed, and claimed he also came from Kodama village. Karina immediately called him a liar, but Argus sheathed his blade and said he believed him. He asked Hakama if she was telling the truth, and she swore Jin was their village's guardian deity. As Argus turned to leave, Jin asked if they were done. The captain nodded, saying it was just business, and apologized for the trouble. Karina couldn't believe they were just letting them walk. But Argus pointed out they were all capital bound anyway, so their paths would cross again. He added that if they ran into any trouble, they should find him so he could make amends. Once they parted ways, Karina demanded to know why the captain retreated, calling Jin a shady, inferior being. Argus wondered aloud who was truly the inferior one in that brief encounter. Another knight spoke up, admitting she had felt a massive gap in their power. The second she drew her blade against Jin, she tried to strike, but was frozen before she could flinch. She couldn't even tap into her divine power. When she reached out to summon the spirits, they completely ignored her. Her fellow knight nodded, admitting the exact same thing happened to her. Argus explained that this proved there was a massive gulf between their strength and Jin's true power. He reckoned that in their entire order, only the Grand Master might stand on equal footing. Karina admitted she had not sensed a thing, but Argus assured her that as a new recruit, it made total sense. Thinking back to the corrupted beast near Kodama, Argus realized Jin was likely the one who took it down. Karina worried about letting such a dangerous man walk free, but Argus replied that while his identity was a mystery, he didn't feel malicious. Still, he kept his guard up. With the corruption crisis settled, they had to return to the capital before their absence drew attention. Plus, he planned to commission the guild to clear out those bandits on the road. Secretly, his thoughts lingered on the guardian deity of Kodama. If they could recruit Jin, he'd be an invaluable asset against the kingdom's greatest threats. By the following morning, as they got back on the road, Jin noted that last night's encounter was intriguing, asking if every holy knight was as formidable as Argus. Hakama told him Argus was different. Only the absolute elite of the order earned the title of Paladin, and Argus was one of them. His mastery over spiritual arts was in a league of its own. This piqued Jin's curiosity, and he asked her to explain further. Hakama clarified that borrowing power from spirits is known as divine power, while the techniques developed from that energy are called spiritual arts. Jin realized that nanomachines were likely seen as spirits in this era. Science had essentially mutated into fantasy. The logic made perfect sense. Then, recalling Karina's hostile prejudice, he asked why she labeled him an inferior species, especially since it seemed like multiple races coexisted in this world. Hakama nodded, explaining that some resembled fish, while others looked like insects. Her grandmother used to tell her that in the distant past, safe land was scarce. Because of this, 10 groups of people had to adapt to different biomes and harsh environments just to survive. Jin wondered if that meant humans had actually survived from 100 million years ago, evolving along completely separate paths. Still, he decided it was best not to get bogged down in history right now. Instead, he asked if the groups who failed to adapt were labeled inferior species. Hakama nodded, explaining they struggled to survive compared to the adapted races, and sadly, most of them ended up being sold as slaves. Jin silently noted how backward this era was if slavery still existed. Hakama added that even in the old days, things went much better. To her, judging someone just because they looked a bit different felt completely wrong. Jin realized she possessed a genuinely kind heart and hoped she would never change. Right there in the middle of the road, a girl suddenly collapsed from exhaustion right before their eyes. She passed out at Jin's feet. Looking closer, he realized she was human and covered in brutal wounds. Hakama rushed to help, and Jin offered to treat her. But the girl suddenly snapped awake, pressed a knife to Hakama's throat, and ordered them to freeze, warning she would kill her if they made a single move. Jin instantly knew it was a setup, which meant they were far from alone out here. In fact, he had already spotted someone sneaking up on them, using stealth. The man congratulated the girl, praising her for pulling off the act exactly as planned. Jin could see the guy was using active camo, with nanomachines bending light to mask his body into the surroundings. It made him practically invisible until he moved, and this guy was a master at it. The bandit leader sneered, mocking Jin for wearing clothes that were far too fancy for an inferior species. He demanded to know his home country, warning him to freeze as a blade pressed against his neck. Hakama tried to summon her divine power, but Jin stopped her, reminding her it was not meant for fighting humans. She backed down. The leader chuckled, saying she should listen to the kid, but his eyes lit up, seeing her immense divine energy. Another bandit piped up, asking if he could have her instead, but before getting an answer, a brutal kick to the gut sent him crashing to the dirt. The leader snapped at him to respect the merchandise, warning him not to damage their highly valuable cargo. Hakama realized these were the slave traders they had been warned about the night before. Suddenly, the leader stepped forward, sparking with electricity to knock the girl out cold. Later, Hakama woke up to find Jin standing there in nothing but his underwear. He asked if she was okay. She said she was fine, but wanted to know where they had taken them. They were locked in a cage, surrounded by dozens of others packed with captured slaves. Jin explained they were in the kidnappers' hideout, alongside tons of other captives. Confused, Hakama asked why he was the only one stripped of his clothes, and he replied that they took them to sell since they looked expensive and rare. He joked that at least they let him keep his boxers. She pointed out he was surprisingly calm, but Jin just shrugged, saying he had spent most of his life running around naked anyway. She made it clear that wasn't what she meant. She was talking about their captivity. She demanded to know why he hadn't fought back when he could have easily crushed them. Just then, one of the beastmen dragged the bruised little girl over to bring them some food. Hakama blamed her for getting him captured, but the girl snapped back that she never asked for anyone's forgiveness. Jin could tell she was actually decent deep down. Real bad guys wouldn't even talk to them. It was time to make a move. Using his bare hands, he bent the metal bars of the cage, creating a gap big enough to squeeze through. He told the little girl he'd been waiting for her, then asked where they were holding the hostage so they could rescue her. Surprised, she asked how he could possibly know that, but he just smiled and said it was a lucky guess. First, Jin deployed nanomachines to heal her wounds. He pointed out that even real scoundrels don't beat their own crew members like that. It was obvious she wasn't actually one of them. She was just another hostage forced to follow orders, and she'd been doing it from day one. The girl got tense, but finally confessed that they had kidnapped her little brother. She only obeyed their orders to keep him safe, since they threatened to separate the two of them forever if she disobeyed. Those same thugs had murdered her parents too, but she kept playing along just to protect the only family she had left. To Jin, these guys were absolute trash. Hakama asked if he'd gotten captured on purpose just to rescue the girl, and Jin confirmed it was all part of his plan. He explained that bad guys are like stubborn grease stains. If you don't clean them up completely, they'll just come back to ruin things later. That's why he'd walked right into their hideout. He wanted to wipe them all out in one single sweep. Charging up the stairs, he smashed through the door and slammed the bandit straight to the floor, ready to pull this evil out by its roots. That's how you deal with trash. Jin understood scoundrels better than anyone. 100 million years ago in his modern life, he was just a kid surviving on the streets. Back then, justice didn't really mean anything to him. But as time went on, he realized that any world needing constant policing was only like that because it was already overflowing with garbage. He had a bounty on his head for reasons he couldn't even fathom. All he truly wanted was a quiet, normal life. He wanted nothing more than a peaceful life, but his harsh upbringing forced him to pick up a weapon and fight. Even the hitmen sent to take him out failed miserably. Instead, he spent his entire life crushing anyone who dared to stand in his way, until someone finally told him the truth. He was simply born in the wrong era, or maybe even the wrong world entirely. That person was Dr. Kagura. And right after dropping the first guard in the base, Jin dragged the body through the halls as a warning, using the corpse as bait to lure in the next targets and clear out the entire hallway. Bursting into the main room, he unloaded a barrage of punches on the armored guards, leaving them zero time to even react. Deep down in the cells, the prisoners could only listen as agonized screams echoed through the facility. The human girl whispered, asking who this guy really was. Hakama replied that he was basically a god and that nobody could touch them while he was around. Now, they needed to run, just like Jin told them to. Still, she worried if they were truly safe. If the faction leader showed up with his massive divine power, she doubted Jin could take him down all by himself. But while she was busy worrying, Jin was already busting down the leader's door. The bandit boss scoffed, asking if he was there to buy slaves too, bragging that he could choose anyone he liked. Jin finished off the last of the guards, then coldly asked if the boss was done talking yet. Panic set in as the slave trader stared, wondering what kind of monster he was dealing with and what power he possessed. Jin muttered that it was a relief he was just some cheap, low-rent thug because a real mastermind would have escaped a long time ago. He was exactly the type to underestimate his opponent, convinced he could never lose, only to beg and offer bribes the second things go south. But the boss still had one final trick up his sleeve. Sprinting to a wall lever, he pulled it, opening a massive steel cage that held a terrifying, corrupted beast, boasting that he bought this wild specimen specifically to tear apart anyone who dared ruin his business, and that Jin was dead meat. The hyper-muscular monster roared and lunged with terrifying speed, but Jin casually blocked the heavy strike with his bare hands. He explained that he was built with a superhuman body, and according to his doctor, his muscle density was on an entirely different level. Against a freak beast like this, he was not going to hold back. Channeling his energy, he completely vaporized the creature on the spot. Stunned, the ringleader gasped, wondering if Jin wielded divine powers too. Jin told him it was time to clean up the last piece of trash. The man whimpered, begging for mercy, but Jin made it clear that option was off the table. He proceeded to thrash the slave merchant until he blacked out entirely. After finally retrieving his gear, which he considered an essential part of the job, Jin headed back to the locked-up children and apologized for taking so long. He promised he would get everyone out of there, but first, he needed to search the main office for files. Leaving without some solid proof of their operations just did not make sense. Rifling through a desk drawer, he pulled out a highly suspicious ledger. He tried skimming it but could not make heads or tails of the text. It was written in an unfamiliar language, so he figured he would ask Hakama to teach him how to read and write it later on. Still, he kept wondering why these outlaws would keep a dangerous, corrupted beast locked up in the first place. It was overkill just for keeping captives in line. To get some answers, he activated his nanomachines to scan the creature. Using this tech, he could reconstruct data, even reading the memory traces left behind on physical matter. As the scan dug deeper, he saw a residual memory of the ringleader speaking with a shadowy superior. In the memory, the boss asked what their higher-ups planned to do with the beast once it was captured, and the mysterious figure told him to mind his own business, though he hinted that something major was about to go down in the kingdom. This was clearly a conspiracy far bigger than simple human trafficking. Soon, local guards finally arrived to take over the scene. They escorted the captives to safety while slapping handcuffs on the slave traders. The young girl Jin rescued wept with joy as she reunited with her little brother, who had been locked in the office. She thanked him over and over, praising him like a literal god, but Jin just shook his head, telling her she did not need to worry about stuff like that. Turning to Hakama, he asked if these soldiers actually belonged to the local lord. She shook her head, explaining they belonged to the local guild, then pointed out a suited man with ram horns, identifying him as the boss. The man walked over and introduced himself as Padrek, the guild leader, expressing his deep gratitude for Jin stepping in. He was genuinely amazed that Jin did not have a single scratch on him after taking down an entire bandit camp alone. Despite being from a lesser species, his strength was undeniable. Padrek noted that this was not their first bust, adding that similar slave rings had been popping up all over the country lately. Jin asked if the local lord cared about catching the criminals. Padrek laughed, explaining that the lord had absolutely no authority in these matters. Crime was handled by the guilds, who answered directly to the king himself. In fact, if the Lord broke the law, they would arrest him too. To Jin, it sounded like the Lord was a mayor and the guild was the police force. Still, he could not forget the dark figure he had seen in his visions. So he handed the evidence from the office over to Padrek, hoping it would help them hunt down the other conspirators. He also asked if the Lord's name was mentioned anywhere in those papers. Padrek chuckled, saying his previous comment was just a joke and that the Lord's name was obviously missing. Jin figured someone had scrubbed the files clean. With no paper trail, proving the Lord's guilt was impossible. Only Jin knew the truth. Jin then asked about the rescued slaves. Padrek explained that the guild would take charge of guarding and escorting them. They would look into their backgrounds and try to return them to their homes. But if they had no home left, there was not much the guild could do. Knowing that the two orphan siblings had absolutely nowhere to go, Jin asked if there were any shelters nearby. Padrek shook his head. They could try finding them work, but they were too young, and because of deep-seated prejudice against their species, finding a willing employer would be tough. Jin realized that even here, that cruel bias existed. Determined to help, he had an idea and asked the kids if they would take a job if he found one. The girl immediately nodded and eagerly asked if he already had a plan. He smiled and thought of Argus, the knight. He knew the perfect spot for them. Meanwhile, Argus felt a sudden chill on his way back to the capital, as if someone was speaking about him. He thanked his men for their hard work and dismissed them. Arriving home, he was greeted by his staff of loyal servants and attendants. Sensing an uneasy vibe in the air, he asked the head butler if something was wrong. The butler apologized for bringing up bad news to a tired man, then whispered a quiet report. Argus thanked him, quickly realizing that the crisis was far worse than he had feared. Corrupted monsters were roaming the capital in broad daylight. Their origin remained a mystery, but he was absolutely certain that someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes. To him, the prime suspect was the independent institution, the Harness Academy. He needed a strong ally to handle this, and he needed them fast. 3 days after stopping the slave traders, Jin, Hakama, and the kids resumed their journey. The girl asked if she could actually find real work in the capital. Jin assured her that with her reading, writing, and math skills, finding work would be easy. Hakama then pointed ahead. Right there stood the Grand Royal Capital. Jin stared in awe. The scale of the city was incredible. Even after sunset, the streets remained packed and full of energy. Crowds filled every corner, bustling about even late into the night. Hakama explained that because almost everything was imported, you could buy absolutely anything here, even famous Kodama clothing. Jin found that fascinating. He watched diverse human-derived races mingling in the streets, living together as if they were a single, harmonious civilization, each growing in their own unique way. The streets were spotless, kids played happily, and order seemed to rule. Still, Jin knew every era had its dark side. Seeing slaves being marched off in a nearby corner left a bitter taste in his mouth. He asked Hakama when the entrance exams for the academy would begin. She told him they started in 1 week, so Jin decided he had plenty of time to explore the city first. Overhearing them, a blonde girl scoffed in surprise, shocked that a mere child, let alone someone from an inferior species, actually expected to get into Harness Academy. Once they reached the inn, the excited kids flopped onto the bed. Jin sighed, glad he could finally sleep in a real bed. Reaching the capital was his first major milestone. Now, it was time to start his real investigation. He just needed to figure out where to start. Plus, living here was going to cost serious money. He had a nice reward from defeating the slave traders, but that coin would not last forever. He also had to secure work for the orphans. Tracking down the knight Argus was his best bet. But without connections, that was easier said than done. His first order of business, looking into the corrupted. Somebody was trying to weaponize those monsters for some dark purpose. But the corrupted were wild, lethal, and completely uncontrollable. He could not let history repeat itself. So, he asked Hakama how people in this fantasy world actually studied. She explained that locals either hired private tutors or studied rare books, but those textbooks cost a fortune. Back in Kodama, everyone shared the few books they had, but the capital city boasted a massive public library. That sounded perfect to Jin. With any luck, he would uncover clues there leading to Kagura's secret laboratory. But once they reached the building, the head librarian delivered some bad news. Ordinary people were banned from reading them. The books were official crown property, and access was heavily restricted. Only top students certified by the Magic Academy and wealthy nobles in the capital were allowed inside. Hakama also pointed out that Jin was basically illiterate. She tried to teach him the basic alphabet, but he knew learning letter by letter would take way too long. He wanted to absorb the knowledge directly from a book. Suddenly, a group of cloaked thugs approached, and they were clearly looking for trouble. The lead attacker did not hesitate, throwing a wild punch at Jin that was effortlessly blocked. Jin casually asked if this was how city folk said hello, especially since he heard the streets here were supposed to be safe. As the thug tried to unleash his divine magic, Jin grabbed his wrist, forcing the blast harmlessly into the sky where it exploded. The thug growled, admitting Jin had fast reflexes, while shocked bystanders whispered about people casting magic openly on the street. Jin calmly demanded to know what they wanted. The leader barked that their boss wanted him dealt with, plain and simple. Jin realized someone had hired these goons, but frankly, he did not mind the workout. One of the beastmen sneered that if he wanted to stay safe, he should pack his bags and get out of the city. Jin shrugged and said he would consider it, since things were getting a bit sketchy. A split second later, he slipped under another strike and slammed the attacker onto the pavement, knocking him out cold. The other thug panicked and summoned a blazing fireball, but Jin effortlessly snuffed the spell into harmless grey smoke. He grabbed the thug by his collar, telling him that if this was their definition of danger, they desperately needed to train harder. The dazed thug stammered, wondering how an inferior species could be so strong. Before another blow landed, a female knight arrived, ordering everyone to freeze. The street fight was over. It was Karina. She complained that she just wanted a peaceful afternoon, but these absolute idiots had to go and ruin it. She declared they were all going to jail, but then she blinked, realizing Jin was standing right at the center of the mess. He smiled, saying it was actually a pretty good outcome. She scoffed, remembering him as that so-called inferior species. She noted he had a lot of nerve to start a major public brawl right in the capital. In her mind, only someone from a low class would act so recklessly without thinking of the consequences. Just then, a bystander stepped forward to clear the air. She explained that Jin was defending himself against the two thugs who ambushed him. Karina scanned the beaten attackers, spotted their uniforms, and asked if they were students from Harness Academy. Her eyes narrowed in suspicion as she muttered that she hoped some high-class young lady wasn't behind this drama again. She ordered nearby guild members to drag the two troublemakers off to the cells. Jin asked who this young lady was, but Karina brushed him off, saying it was none of his business. He then questioned why royal knights were patrolling the streets, since he figured that was the local guild's job. Karina explained that the massive capital was filled with highly dangerous fighters, meaning the knights had to step in to keep the peace. Internally, she lamented that she had only been searching for a quiet place to grab lunch before this chaos erupted. Still, she had to admit, Jin was incredibly powerful academy. Students were formidable opponents. Before walking away, she warned him to keep his head down and stay out of trouble. As she turned, he quickly asked her for a small, quick favor. A bit later, Jin visited Argus at his estate, asking him to employ the two young kids. Argus recalled promising to help with his problems, but then dryly asked why Jin's little group seemed to have grown since they last met. Jin explained that he had run into some nasty slave traders, but managed to free the two children during his escape. When Argus pressed for details about the outlaws, Jin assured him that the local adventurers guild had handled the situation. Argus was shocked, realizing Jin had likely defeated the gang entirely on his own. Before asking about the kids' backgrounds, Jin explained that they were homeless orphans who couldn't find work due to intense racism against their species. He wanted to give them a fighting chance, since they had already suffered far too much prejudice. Argus sighed, pointing out that he was under no obligation to help them. Jin explained that this was just how he handled things. No matter what, he had saved them and would see it through to the end. Argus agreed to hire them as household servants, but on one condition. He wanted Jin to work as an instructor. Before long, both children were dressed in brand new uniforms. Jin pointed out that they actually looked pretty sharp. The girls showered Argus with thanks, calling him Lord, but he insisted gratitude was unnecessary since they would be working for their keep. He ordered the butler and head maid to train them properly, making it absolutely clear he would not tolerate any prejudice just because of their species. As they walked down the halls, Jin asked if there was a hidden motive behind this teaching gig. Argus smiled, praising his sharp instincts. He admitted he did not know Jin's past, but knew he was both good and incredibly powerful. He needed him to go undercover as a teacher at the Harness Academy. He explained that the country's politics were a total mess, with rival factions fighting for supreme control. The king was dying with very little time left, meaning the bloody struggle for the throne had already begun. Worse still, it was not just corrupt politicians pulling the strings, but dangerous criminals as well, who used corrupted beasts and dragged innocent bystanders into their petty war. Jin realized the corrupt lord from those memories was just the tip of the iceberg. Argus agreed, warning that dark forces were taking over the capital. They had to locate their hideout and expose the truth fast. When Jin asked if the Harness Academy was the prime suspect, Argus confirmed that was exactly the case. He opened the door to introduce Jin's inside guide to the academy, his very own sister, Milia Alton. Milia immediately complained to her brother about having to help an inferior creature disguise himself. Argus firmly told her to behave. She snapped back, arguing that his very existence was a complete insult. Even if the young girl next to him possessed real power, it still did not justify handing a major role to someone like him. Jin quietly noted that the young lady had a sharp tongue. Argus quickly apologized for her attitude. Karina leaned in and whispered to Jin that Milia was incredibly talented and highly connected, but also deeply arrogant and full of prejudice. Jin got the message. Milia then demanded to know if he understood his task, since merely wearing a disguise was not enough. He had to play the part of a professional instructor and actually back it up. She made it clear she doubted his abilities, openly questioning if he even had any actual knack for teaching. Hakama blurted out that Jin could not even read. Annoyed, Jin snapped back that she did not have to put it so bluntly. Milia declared that letting him join the mission was completely out of the question, and she absolutely refused to work with him. Hakama tried to smooth things over, pointing out that Jin had plenty of other useful skills. After all, he was incredibly strong. Milia stared at him for a moment, saying that if he was truly powerful, he should easily handle mere students. Even so, she insisted that being an instructor required far more than just raw, brute force. As she walked out, Argus let out a heavy sigh. Moments later, Karina confessed that she was the one behind the surprise attack on Jin earlier. Argus apologized, promising to deal with her later, but Jin insisted it was no big deal. Still, he asked what exactly Argus hoped to achieve with this teaching cover story. Argus explained that he chose him for this specific role because of his incredible mastery of spiritual arts. To keep up appearances, he only needed to teach the students basic magic, like sparking a flame, releasing a shock, freezing, and healing. These were known as the 4 fundamental spiritual arts. Jin asked if that was really all, which Argus found to be a rather odd reaction, wondering if he could actually cast every single element, since only a tiny fraction of mages could do that. Jin recalled that the bandit leader he fought earlier was considered a genius. This was getting interesting, and he was more than ready to show this world what he could really do. It turned out, the rules of this era were completely different from anything he had expected. A week flew by, and the day of the Harness Academy entrance exam finally arrived. Hakama took the test herself, eager to enroll. At the gate, a staff member greeted our guest with deep respect, saying it was an honor to host him, especially since the 7th unit of the Holy Knights must be incredibly busy. Argus replied that they were just pulling their usual shift. Jin asked what he meant, and Argus explained that once a year, they had the privilege of recommending someone to the academy. They needed a new guest instructor, and since the 7th unit held the nominating rights that year, Argus used his power to put him forward. The clerk seriously doubted if this guy was actually fit for the job, especially since he belonged to an inferior species. Still, he escorted the group to the waiting director. Argus offered a respectful greeting, noting it had been quite some time since their last encounter. She remarked that they had not crossed paths since his graduation, praising how quickly he had become a distinguished knight before thanking him for his steady cooperation. However, she admitted to hearing troubling rumors, not just about his magic but also regarding internal faction struggles. She acknowledged his busy schedule but made it clear he still needed to show the academy more respect. Then, gesturing to Jin, she questioned why he was nominating an inferior species and if he honestly believed the man could teach here. Jin, completely exhausted by the constant insults, just held his tongue. Argus shot back that Jin was more than capable, possessing fighting skills that outmatched anyone in the 7th unit. The director wanted to hear other opinions before deciding. Instantly, one of the board members spoke up to voice his absolute disapproval, calling the idea ridiculous and claiming such a teacher would tarnish the school's proud history since they had never hired an inferior species for the job, insisting it was no place for someone of his background. The director noted Lord Gita's clear stance and turned to ask Rudman for his thoughts. Rudman agreed with the opposition, warning that with so many students coming from elite noble houses, the academy's reputation would tank if parents discovered an inferior species was teaching their children. While the director admitted she was leaning toward a rejection, she still wanted to hear what Jin had to say. He politely introduced himself as Shido Jin from Kodama village, offering a quick apology for speaking up so late. The director found herself highly impressed by how calm he stayed despite the heavy insults thrown his way. Jin explained that he completely got their worries, but requested they clarify just one minor point. He asked if they were rejecting him purely because of his race, or if they genuinely doubted his actual fighting capabilities. The director countered that if he had the power, nothing else would matter, challenging him to prove it. Argus immediately suggested a test, and soon, they all gathered at the combat training arena. Get famous for his massive nose, mockingly noted that with entrance exams happening, the halls were mostly empty, meaning Jin would at least escape the embarrassment of failing in front of a massive crowd. Jin ignored the cheap provocations entirely. Stepping forward, the director announced that the rules were incredibly simple. The duel would rely strictly on spiritual arts. Despite the sparse crowd due to testing day, the remaining students gathered around, highly eager to witness the upcoming clash. Milia quietly observed from the sidelines. Jin, however, found the entire ordeal to be a massive waste of time, while the director seemed genuinely thrilled to witness his power. Argus realized this would be his very first opportunity to watch Jin fight up close. Those from inferior species usually possess weaker bodies and could never hope to touch the peak of divine strength. He silently hoped his faith in the man was justified. Geed signaled the start and immediately opened with a blazing fireball. Jin dodged it effortlessly. Seeing the students watching, Geed played to the crowd and loosed a volley of crackling lightning arrows. But Jin evaded every single one. Geed sneered, thinking his opponent only knew how to run, typical behavior for a lesser species. Though he was not a holy knight, he held absolute confidence in his magic, relentlessly swapping between elemental fire and lightning strikes. Jin hated the idea of unleashing his high-tech nanomachines on simple people, but they left him no other choice. Unleashing just a tiny fraction of his power, Jin casually raised his hand, invoking a heavy gravity field that violently slammed Geed into the dirt. The crowd stood frozen. No one had ever witnessed such a bizarre magical art. Geed desperately tried to push himself up, but failed. Jin calmly noted that he had merely shifted the local gravity, asking if they seriously did not recognize the technique. He dryly added that he clearly had plenty to teach at this academy, and not just to the students, but the instructors as well. A moment later, he cancelled the gravity, freeing Geed, who lay there completely dazed and broken. Geed demanded to know what he did, but Jin casually called it a spiritual art. Geed spat back that he had never heard of such magic, calling it a cheap trick. The director declared she had seen enough, and Argus nodded in agreement. Milia stood frozen, recognizing it as a top-tier high-level spiritual art, utterly baffled as to how he pulled it off. Only the noble races enjoyed the protection of spirits. A mere human from an inferior species should never possess such overwhelming power. She began to wonder what he truly was. A week later, the director stood in the auditorium giving her opening speech. She announced that while the academy provided standard classes, its real goal was training warriors to fight the world's dark evils. Anyone who couldn't keep up would be expelled without mercy. But for those who actually graduated, joining the Holy Knights wouldn't be a pipe dream. In this world, everything was earned through blood, sweat, and merit. Meanwhile, Milia stood among the veterans, most of whom came from wealthy noble families. Linus, a beastman who looked like a lion, noted that she rarely showed up to entrance ceremonies and asked what brought her there. She pointed out that he rarely showed up either. Linus shrugged, saying that if any promising noble rookies arrived, it was smart to make connections early. Then something caught his eye, and he asked why a member of an inferior species was sitting with the faculty. Milia shrugged and said it was simple, he was a teacher. She asked what he thought of the man. Linus sneered that he only saw a lesser being. Milia quietly agreed that he was probably right. Meanwhile, Jin was focused on the secret investigation he had to carry out. The campus was massive, and he drew stares wherever he went. Ever since he arrived, he could feel everyone watching him. The hardest part of his mission would be changing how people viewed humans, who were seen as lesser. Right now, he was the most suspicious guy on campus. To make any progress with his search, he first had to earn their respect. Later, Geed stood in the classroom where Jin was set to teach, announcing the start of their spiritual arts classes. He warned the new students to pay attention. Since this was supposed to be an elite class, or at least, that was the rumor. He wondered why the seats were so empty, and if the students lacked motivation. To Milia, the answer was painfully obvious. Geed muttered that nobody wanted to learn spiritual arts from an inferior race, instantly deciding to spread more nasty rumors to humiliate the new teacher even further. With that, he handed the floor over to the new instructor to introduce himself. Shidojin introduced himself as their basic spiritual arts instructor and politely welcomed everyone to the class. Lizarda scoffed, questioning if he was truly qualified for the job. Jin calmly shot back that it wasn't up to students to make that call. Anyone who didn't want to be here was free to walk out. But if you stayed, you had to follow one golden rule: never use your power against other people. He explained that spiritual arts were originally developed for one purpose: to neutralize the terrifying strength of corrupted beasts. Since the suppression effect didn't work on human bodies, these spells were never meant to be turned against other people. This magic existed solely to destroy monsters. He firmly warned the class never to abuse their magic. Hearing this, a noble student scoffed loudly, asking if he was stupid and arguing that power was simply power. He added that he was curious to see what a lesser human could possibly teach them, but being told not to use their magic was just laughable. He even mocked that maybe the teacher was just terrified his students would surpass him. Jin calmly shot back that if the boy really thought he was powerless, he should step up and prove it. He dared him to use his strongest attack, promising he wouldn't even get a speck of dust on his clothes. If he got so much as a scratch, he promised to leave the academy forever. He asked the boy if he accepted the wager. In response, the noble leaped onto a desk, shouting insults and charging a massive lightning spell that shook the entire room. He unleashed the lightning directly at Jin, triggering an explosion that left the room covered in smoke and scorch marks. A split second later, a sharp blade whizzed right past the noble's ear. Jin calmly remarked that if he wanted to, he could have ended him right there. He warned that judging someone based on looks or prejudice was a lethal mistake. Confused, Linus wondered what kind of shield that was, and if it was actually a spiritual art. Jin asked the boy if he still looked down on humans, proving he was far stronger than him, and reminded him to address him as professor. Capitalizing on the dead silence, Jin asked the class a simple question, asking if anyone knew the exact conditions to activate spiritual arts, pointing at the student who just attacked him to answer. The noble muttered that it was simple, you just focus your divine power and picture what you want to release. Jin agreed that imagination played a part, but explained that wasn't what actually triggered the magic. He explained that spiritual arts manifest when they are accepted by the body, flowing through the soul to create unique wavelengths inside the user. He noted there are 8 primary wavelengths, creating fire, lightning, healing, and ice, the most well-known of the bunch. Hovering above them were gravity control, light, air, and spatial shields, the exact magic he had pulled off earlier. Those were the 8 pillars of magic. Jin was stunned to hear him claim he could master all 8 elements. Jin explained that shaping lightning into a spear, just like the student did, was all about pure imagination. With that established, he announced it was time to start the class for real. Wandering the empty hallways later, his mind stayed locked on the investigation. The massive academy crawled with students, and countless eyes tracked his every move. Knowing he looked highly suspicious, he needed to seek out spots off the beaten path. Right then, he ran into Milia, who bluntly demanded to know what he really was. Jin smiled and replied he was simply a low-class human, just like she had claimed before. She admitted she might have judged him too quickly since he was clearly anything but normal. Still, she argued that an inferior human shouldn't be able to cast every single spell. Jin patiently replied that, like he said in class, anyone could master them all. They just had to learn how to shift their internal wavelength. Milia shrugged, noting that even with his lecture, it sounded incredibly tough. If anyone could do it, he wouldn't be the center of attention right now. Finally, she suggested finding a quieter, more private spot to keep talking. As they walked, Milia asked if he was finally going to answer her original question. Jin said he was just a relic from an ancient era who slept in Kodama village for 100 million years. She laughed at his joke and asked what he actually did 100 million years ago. He replied that he wore many hats, but mostly worked as a special agent, working his fingers to the bone for the government, fighting villains, deadly monsters, and various other threats. Despite the vast passage of time, it still felt like yesterday, bringing back a weird wave of nostalgia. When she asked how he ended up asleep for so long, Jin admitted he failed. He had been too arrogant, thinking he could save the world alone. Because of that tragic mistake, he saved no one, and everyone lost everything. He realized too late that he needed allies, because nobody can stop a global crisis by themselves. Milia wondered if he was telling the truth, but chose not to push him any further for now. Instead, she explained she was just honoring her deal to act as his guide, a promise she made to her brother. She led him into a moldy, forgotten storage room, packed with broken junk. Stepping inside, his sharp eyes quickly picked up on a few bizarre details. Milia guessed he was searching for this exact spot. The official campus map showed an empty room here, yet nobody had ever been able to find it, which was highly suspicious. Jin agreed, immediately scanning the messy room for anything out of place. Soon, his eyes locked onto a single object that felt completely out of place. A tiny owl statue that was completely free of dust. He twisted the bird's head, and with a heavy groan, a hidden doorway slid open. Startled, Milia gasped and asked how on earth he spotted that. Jin shrugged, saying it was pretty obvious since everything else was blanketed in dust. The rest, he claimed, was just pure gut instinct. Telling her to wait, he offered to lead the way since they had no idea what dangers lurked below. Milia immediately protested, insisting she was coming along and warning him not to underestimate her. She reminded him that she was a top-tier student and every bit as capable as her brother. Relenting, he admitted he could trust her to handle herself, at least a little. Together, they started down a stone staircase that plunged far deeper than any school basement. The air grew cold as the passage opened into a pitch-black, eerie cavern. Jin muttered that this was exactly the sort of creepy place where nightmarish beasts are born. As they made their way down, Milia seized the opportunity to dig into his past. She wanted to know who he used to battle and if he had flagged anyone suspicious at school. He joked that she was asking way too many questions, but finally admitted one person on campus had caught his eye, a guy named Rudman. He noted that Rudman seemed perfectly normal in conversation, but the second he was alone, his demeanor shifted completely. It was like his mind had drifted away, leaving only an empty shell behind. It felt like someone was forcing him to play a part at the school, while his actual mission lay elsewhere. Plus, his guard was constantly up, and he was the first to suspect Jin when he arrived. Milia chimed in, admitting she found Gid far more sketchy than Rudman. But Jin disagreed. He explained that Gid wears his heart on his sleeve and could never hold the disguise for long. He was likely just unstable. Anyway, reaching the bottom of the steps, they stepped into a massive chamber that resembled an abandoned, hollow warehouse. It was dead quiet, far more mysterious than the path they took to reach it. Milia never expected such a massive cavern under the academy, but Jin was the one who stood completely frozen in shock. At the far end of the massive room, he spotted something that made his jaw drop. It was the entrance to one of Kagura's secret labs. He knew for a fact that structure was built using nanomachines. Milia asked what was behind those heavy doors and why anyone would hide them under the school. Jin explained that normally they would need an access key. Back in Kodama village, Hakama needed a key for a similar facility. That meant all these doors likely required authentication. Or did they? There was only one way to find out. Focusing on the lock, he channeled the power he had gained from the nanomachine injection. To his absolute shock, it slid open easily. That meant only one thing, the doors were already unlocked. Jin realized that whoever was trying to tear the country apart already had the keys to this lab. When they stepped inside, the scene was far worse than they had feared. The room was packed with corrupted beasts locked in cages, including one creature of monstrous size. Milia stood frozen, wondering how such horror could be hidden right under the academy without anyone noticing. She also demanded to know how he had opened the door so easily. Jin gave a vague reply, teasing that he was just a very special ancient human. Deep down, she started wondering if his crazy story about 100 million years was actually true. Meanwhile, Jin studied the beasts closely and noticed something highly unusual. They weren't going wild. They didn't claw at their cages, nor did they show any signs of anger or stress about being locked up. That was when he remembered the beast that the slaver bandit leader had unleashed on him. It had been completely peaceful inside its cage too, acting as if it obeyed that man's every command. Something felt off. He also couldn't help but wonder how anyone managed to drag such a massive beast down here. Milia realized her brother was right to suspect the academy all along. Perhaps if they set up an ambush inside the lab, the mastermind behind everything would show up. Jin didn't agree. In his mind, the safest move was to lock down the academy instantly and destroy every corrupted beast. She argued that doing so would let the culprit slip away. Jin understood her point, but he raised a much larger concern. What if these beasts broke free and slaughtered the students? It wasn't worth risking innocent lives just to catch the person pulling the strings. Besides, he had a terrible feeling. His gut told him that something far worse was about to go down. He decided to search the lab more thoroughly, ordering Milia to run back and warn Argus right away. As she rushed upstairs, Jin started exploring the dark laboratory hallways, searching for clues and scanning every detail. Meanwhile, up above, Gid was getting ridiculed in the hallways. Students were whispering about how he lost to the inferior species professor. He was absolutely seething. He believed that Bastard had completely ruined his reputation. In his mind, anyone using 8 different spiritual arts had to be cheating. He was determined to expose Jin. Just then, the director appeared, telling him to stop acting so bizarre. She claimed she wouldn't judge his weird hobbies, but asked if he had seen Lord Rudman anywhere. Jin replied that he hadn't seen him since the opening ceremony. The director explained she needed to consult Rudman about an issue, specifically concerning the new students. Suddenly, she noticed something highly bizarre up in the sky. Black clouds were gathering directly over the academy. These weren't regular storm clouds, they were thick with pure corruption. Milia bolted up the stairs, only to find none other than Lord Rudman, waiting at the very top. Back inside, Jin was already deep in the lab, examining a strange core that pulsed like a living heart. He wasn't sure if Kagura had built it, but as he searched further, he stumbled upon another one of those metallic cases. Inside lay a cube holding a recorded message and a nanomachine injection. He desperately hoped it would shed some light on the crisis he was facing. Playing the recording, Kagura asked if he could hear him, noting that he had finally arrived. It made sense, since this lab was the closest one to where he had first woken up. In fact, this was where Kagura had been developing an incredible new device. Some of its special functions had been sealed away alongside the nanomachines inside that very injection. He praised his own genius, explaining that once the injection was taken, only Jin would be able to operate the device. And that invention was actually a teleportation device. Hearing this, a shocked Jin started putting the pieces together. That had to be how the giant beast and the core got here. He realized that teleportation technology was something far ahead of its time. That technology couldn't have existed 100 million years ago, since it linked different dimensions together, just like portals. If that was true, it explained how those dangerous monsters spawned right in the middle of the busy capital city, not to mention how giant beasts and that power source breached the academy basement. Then the footage took a dark turn. The energy core flashed with a blinding light, and suddenly, every single corrupted beast began warping away. Argus and the 7th Division had braced for the absolute worst-case scenario, and now it was actually happening. A literal rain of terrifying beasts started falling over the capital. Meanwhile, up on the academy roof, Rudman demanded to know why Milia was there. He told her she had been poking her nose where it did not belong, but now, her time was up. Today was execution day. It was supposed to happen later, but they fast-tracked the plans, because she and that pesky little man had been digging around way too much. Just by instinct, he knew the kid would ruin his master plan, especially after they stumbled onto that hidden tunnel. Milia refused to back away, but a smug Rudman claimed he could easily crush her now that he wielded such immense new power. Little did he know, Hakama and her friend were sneaking up right behind him, waiting to strike. Right in the middle of his arrogant villain monologue, Hakama smashed a heavy vase over his head, knocking him out cold. Milia asked what they were doing there, and Hakama explained they needed Jin immediately because complete chaos was unfolding out on the streets. She added that her friend Kudo was the one who tipped her off about him being up here. Milia asked if she was a freshman, and Kudo quickly nodded, confirming she was, introducing herself by her full name. She even asked if the professor would survive the blow, fully aware she had just assaulted an academy teacher. Still, she felt it was totally justified, joking that since nobody saw her do it, they could just pin the blame on some rich girl. Just then, Jin came dashing up the stairwell. Hakama tried to warn him about the chaos outside, but he grimly replied that he already knew. All the corrupted monsters from the lab had vanished. Milia instantly realized what that meant, and the reality was absolutely terrifying. Looking out from the top of the academy, they watched the capital being ripped apart in real time. Vicious beasts were everywhere, butchering civilians, tearing down homes, and triggering absolute panic across the city. The biggest beast of them all, the titan previously locked in the giant cage, was now slaughtering everything in its path. Jin realized his tiny lapse in judgment had triggered this massive tragedy, and he wanted to punch himself. As he struggled to process it all, Hakama grabbed his arm, telling him to watch closely because the beast was charging up. The massive titan was pulling pure energy, aiming a devastating blast directly at the royal castle. Right then, Jin remembered the special gift he had received from the doctor. Kagura had mentioned that the nanomachine injection allowed him to use a basic form of teleportation. Using the power stored inside the nanomachines, he could pull off this trick just once a day. It was designed strictly for short-range leaps, but he could push the tech slightly past its breaking point. Without wasting a second, Jin warped directly into the path of the blast, deploying a nano-shield to absorb the blow. Over in the streets, guild members panicked. Harden Gonslot, the capital's top guild master, admitted defeat and said they were completely out of options. He had deployed every available fighter to rescue civilians. Now, they had to pray the Holy Knights could wipe out these beasts. The catch was that half the knights were currently deployed outside the capital on official business. Clearly, the enemies had timed this raid for the exact moment they were most vulnerable. If the Grand Captain were here, they might stand a chance. But right now, it seemed hopeless, and he looked down believing the castle was doomed. Suddenly, a breathless messenger told him to look up. Staring up, he saw Jin blocking the blast with a glowing shield. A nearby girl gasped, recognizing him as the hero she saw back in Kodama village. After tanking the colossal blow, Jin fired back with a massive energy beam, but it only scorched the titan's shoulder, and the wound immediately began healing. It was clear he needed a whole lot more firepower to put this colossal beast down for good. Warping had drained way more energy than anticipated. Desperate, he forged a sword out of nanomachines, ready to take the beast on in close combat. He unleashed a wind slash that severed the titan's remaining arm, instantly sprinting forward to close the gap. He knew a simple flesh wound would heal in seconds, but these quick strikes were just a setup for his real move. Now he had to focus on the fundamentals of using nanomachines in actual combat. He neutralized his own body weight with gravity magic and cranked up the surrounding air pressure using wind control. Meanwhile, the guild struggled to hold off the smaller beasts, but even the worst troublemakers from the academy joined the fight. In this chaos, everyone had to fight. Trapped by monsters, they watched Jin charge across the battlefield, shredding beasts left and right as he headed straight for the boss. Some students could barely believe this was the same guy they knew. Jin knew he had to get closer to land the fatal blow, but he had to dodge the giant's relentless attacks, breaking his stride. Still, he carved through enemies wherever he moved, his speed accelerating with every single step. He shifted into high gear, closing the gap, distracting a titan capable of leveling the entire capital all by himself. His rapid blade strikes carved the beast up, but they were shallow cuts against its active regeneration. Then, pulling every ounce of his energy, he lunged forward like a spear, aiming straight for its head. The massive explosion finally put the monster down. The guild master stood there speechless, wondering who this guy was and where such insane power came from. 3 days later, the capital was already starting to rebuild. Waking up in his inn room, Jin thought about the battle. It was a massive disaster, but things could have been so much worse. The Order of the Holy Knights put up a brave fight, holding off the lesser monsters and keeping civilians safe. In the aftermath, the academy shut down for investigation. Rudman, pinned as the main culprit, was locked up. Several other instructors were dragged in for questioning, suspected of being in on the plot. The school was set to stay closed for a long time, even though Jin's teaching career lasted exactly 1 day. Still, this entire ordeal made him realize a brand new challenge was waiting for him on the horizon. Even now, Jin knew he could easily deal with another giant monster like the one in the capital. The real trouble started if a whole crowd of them showed up at once. He just was not fast enough to wipe out groups of monsters while protecting innocent bystanders. To keep everyone safe, he had to unlock even greater power. Luckily, he already had a plan in mind. But before he could reach for Kagura's cube, a knock came at the door. It was Milia, stunning in a long dress, announcing she was there to collect him. Jin pointed out that the academy was currently shut down, but she explained that her brother had requested his presence. He wanted to offer his thanks and discuss some other important matters. He asked if she had actually come in person, just to invite him. Milia answered yes. To invite a man as important as him, they had to send someone of high status. She was there representing the noble Alton family. He asked if she would finally stop calling his kind an inferior species, and she teased that she might think about it. She admitted that looks can be deceiving, and that one should always show proper respect, no matter what. From this point forward, she wanted to become his student. Hakama found her sudden change of heart highly amusing. Milia quickly added that she only came because her dorm room was getting incredibly boring. Hakama complained about her rude entrance, hinting at her lingering prejudices, and Jin teased her about whether she had actually learned her lesson. Later, arriving at Zoltan's estate, the two siblings who got jobs thanks to Jin warmly welcomed him and showed him inside. He noted that the pair seemed to be settling in nicely, then asked how they held up during the monster attack. They nodded, explaining that the staff working at the estate were surprisingly powerful. The head butler and head maid were absolute powerhouses, leaving Jin relieved to see the siblings in such good hands. They mentioned hearing rumors about his mind-blowing heroics. When he asked who had been spreading those stories, it turned out to be Milia. She argued that legendary deeds should be shared, especially by a devoted student like her. She had even advised the siblings to learn from Jin, since they shared a similar background. The younger sibling chimed in, noting that Lady Milia had been acting way nicer to them lately. Jin chuckled, thinking her turnaround was just as fast as Salus's. Right after, he made his way to Argus's office. Knocking on the door, he found Argus chatting with a guest. Sitting beside him was the capital's guild leader, Harden Ganslot. Argus apologized for the sudden summons, but Jin brushed it off, saying he was looking for a distraction anyway. Argus introduced his guest first. Harden formally introduced himself, expressing his sheer honor after personally witnessing Jin's unbelievable power during the citywide crisis. If he had not stopped that beast, the damage would have been catastrophic. He truly thanked him for saving the entire nation. Jin humbly replied that he only took down the biggest beast, while the Holy Knights and Guild handled the rest of them. Harden saw a humble, friendly guy, either completely lacking ambition or driven by goals far grander than they could ever imagine. Then he broke the news. Because of the battle, the royal family requested a personal meeting with him. Before that though, he needed to clear something up. He asked him directly, "Who are you?" Thanks to guild members scattered across different cities, they had tracked his every move and run a background check, yet they found absolutely nothing about his past. Argus pointed this out directly, demanding to know where he came from and why he was here. With no other choice, Jin had to answer. He explained that he was not actively trying to hide anything. He simply figured that even if he told them the whole truth, they would never believe him. So, he kept quiet. Argus assured him that he would believe whatever he said. Taking a breath, Jin decided to tell the truth. He was a human from 100 million years ago. After hearing the whole tale, Argus recalled the ancient legend of Kodama village, which spoke of a divine guardian asleep behind massive, sealed doors. Harden admitted it sounded impossible to believe, but Milia spoke up first, declaring that she trusted his words completely. She had seen Jin open the hidden doors beneath the academy, a feat nobody else could accomplish. Plus, both she and her brother had witnessed his mind-boggling, absurd level of power firsthand. Argus then asked what had become of his sister, and Jin explained that he had slept right here in this land for all those eons. His reason for traveling to the capital was actually quite simple. He needed to gather intel on this modern era, since his knowledge was outdated by 100 million years. Harden asked what specific kind of information he was searching for. Jin replied that he wanted to study the corrupted monsters of this age. because those same beasts existed 100 million years ago. But logically, they should have gone extinct long ago. When the others asked why they were still around, he explained the power of spirits. Back then, those spirits were scattered across the globe. Their unique energy was the ultimate, mortal weakness of all corrupted creatures. It was an energy source meant to seal those monsters away and heal the shattered environments they left behind. Naturally, that raised a big question. If that was true, why are the corrupted still thriving today? Jin admitted he did not know the exact details, and that was precisely why he was investigating. A friend had tipped him off that these monsters were actually evolving. Harden glanced at the artifact in Jin's hands, asking if it came from that lost civilization. To his eyes, it seemed like an incredibly advanced system. Looking at how ancient humans fought those monsters, they clearly possessed deep knowledge about the threat. That was precisely why Jin traveled to the capital to research and find answers. Argus then asked what other piece of information he was hoping to uncover. Jin explained he was searching for hidden laboratories, just like the one sealed beneath the academy grounds. He believed there were more of them scattered across the globe, and his ultimate goal was clear: to wipe every last corrupted being off the face of the earth. That was his entire purpose. Both men admitted the tale was hard to swallow, but Argus chose to believe him. After all, his own mission was to eradicate the corrupted too. Still, he warned Jin not to go around sharing this story with strangers, as most people would just call him crazy. Harden agreed, stating that if Argus trusted him, then he would also put his faith in him. If he had come here with bad intentions, he never would have risked his life to protect the castle. Just then, servants walked in. Apologizing for the interruption, they reminded Argus of the next appointment on his schedule. He stood up, instructing them to get everything ready. Later on, Jin got dressed in elegant noble attire with his hair styled, preparing for his meeting with the king. Argus asked if he was uncomfortable, but the clothes actually fit perfectly, and everyone agreed they looked great on him. Then Harden explained that he would not actually meet the king but the crown prince, who was stepping in because his majesty was bedridden. It was all about keeping up appearances, which was why Jin had to dress the part. Jin just muttered that he hoped this would not bring more trouble. Upon arriving at the palace, a squad of guards greeted them and escorted the group straight to the throne room. Waiting for them was an incredibly striking, commanding figure, the first prince of the capital, Tails Komosia. Jin offered a respectful introduction. The prince explained he was standing in for his sick father, wanting to show gratitude not just on behalf of the king, but the entire kingdom. He praised their actions during the crisis, and mentioned he heard Jin came from Kodama village. He found it surprising that such incredible talent came from a tiny village. Then, getting straight to the point, he made a direct offer. He wanted Jin to serve the kingdom as a holy knight, and ultimately join his side.